Hello and welcome back to Red in the Face. Today, myself, Dan, and Jared are joined by two special guests to discuss the recent Peruvian presidential election, where socialist candidate Pedro Castillo edged out a narrow victory against his far-right opponent, Keiko Fujimori. You might recognize Katerina's voice from our previous episodes on Bolivia and Venezuela, where we discussed the movements for socialism in those countries, and we're also joined by her comrade Betty Rhaza from Movimiento Micaela Bastidas. We're going to hop straight in with some of the political history of Peru before moving on to focus on the election.
This is lower, this is upper. This is the oppressed, this is the oppressed. This is the exploited, this is the exploiter.
Hierarchy as it exists in the family. Hierarchy as it exists in the school.
Is it right that so many people live in such poverty in a society surrounded by such riches? No, it obviously is not.
Because of the way this society is organized, because of the violence that exists on the surface everywhere, you have to expect that there are going to be such explosions. You have to expect things like that as reactions.
So I don't know what Betty's view is, but for me, a sort of flash history of Peru is so very similar to Bolivia. It's what anthropologists would class as a witness society, which means that the people in Peru are descendants of those that suffered the invasion and the colonization of the Spanish conquistadors. So basically, Peruvians, similar to Bolivians, will trace back their problems in society 500 years. This is 500 years of colonialism, 500 years of imperialism, 500 years of capitalist plunder. And you have those ethnic tensions as well between the sort of wealthier white or mixed race society in part of Peruvian society and the more indigenous or more rural areas of Peruvian society. And you have big sort of big regional tensions between Lima, the capital, and the Andes and the Amazon. And then I suppose fast forward to the 20th century, you've got you have various military governments and various coups and everything, and then in the 80s you have the emergence of these shining path guerrillas who really they're very different from other guerrilla movements around the world. I think this is important to understand. This is not the FARC that sort of emerged as a sort of peasant self-defense force. This is they don't really have much they don't have that legitimacy, right? So it's almost I heard one person
outsiders more so.
Well, I had one person describe them as like the Khmer Rouge of South America, right? So they were and they assassinated members of the left as well as everyone else, and so and so you have they emerged during that war went on under the APRA regimes and the Fujimori regimes, right. And Fujimoriism is the start of neoliberalism in Peru.
So we're talking 80s and 90s then.
Fujimori started in 1990, and that was the real sort of he implemented the Fuji shock, which is these shocking economic measures of brutal austerity, which really spiked poverty, but at the same time it did deal with inflation. He did it to deal with inflation, and And at the same time, he dissolved Congress and started a self-coup where he got rid of all of the other powers, right? So you have the presidency, the judiciary, the legislative power. He got rid of the other two and just decided to rule as an autocrat. And he's now in jail. And then you have, after that, you have a sort of Peru trying to rebuild and recover from its traumatized past. And they had a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Fujimori is in jail, but also the leaders of the Shining Path are in jail. But there hasn't been that economic reparations for people.
Have we had like
that's
sort
a
of
fast-forward
centrists?
history.
Have we had like centrists in power since then? Would you say through the sort of
Yeah.
21st century?
Centrists and sort of quite very neoliberal governments.
Right.
And then there was an attempt to elect a left-wing government in 2010, but they did a Lenin Moreno. So they were elected on a left-wing ticket, but then very quickly became neoliberal and very quickly sided with mining multinationals against the peasants. And that regime was almost as bad. But yeah, I don't know what Betty thinks about my 500 years quick history of Peru.
We can say that during in these centuries of after the first independence of Peru, which was actually more in the front line and organization was by the criollos. How do you describe criollos, Katerina? Criollos is the children of the foreign people from Spain, for example, who came to live in Peru. And the power and the
like Spanish descendants.
Yeah, so the power was in the hand of this elite that grew in Peru for centuries. And there are new the character of society on those times was not actually capitalist. It was the previous
feudal. Is that right?
Yeah, evil character. But when the industrial revolution started, Peru had the impact and the influence of those new form of states.
Yeah.
But even though it was quite late in the process to pass to the capitalism under the new regime, like under the influence of the industrialization. But anyway, so the society was growing in the difference of classes of the owner of the lands and the peasants or Indios who were working on their lands under very difficult conditions. It was abuse and exploitation to those classes. So under that form of social classes, the Peru was continued for some centuries, and but actually when in the government previous to Juan Velasco Alvarado, it was Fernando de la Onde Terry who was in the under the influence of a liberal economy, who was actually in favor of the new capitalistic. And then, but for those years, new guerrilla groups started to flourish with the influence of Che Guevara movement in in Latin America, in Cuba especially. So, and that was, for example, we have Hugo Blanco, who started to fight for the land of the peasant, especially in Cusco, in the south Andes of Peru. We also have Luis de la Puente Uceda, who was more Guevaristic, and he started to talk about socialism. And that group was a broken wing of the Partido Aprista Peruano, who was the big party, the main party, political party, who was a central democratic party. So there was another group. So we have three guerrilla groups, and then this President Belaúnde Terry caught them all. They killed some, not Hugo Blanco. Most of them were killed. And then the crisis in the rural zones and the agriculture all was in a chaos. So in October 1978, it was a coup in Peru on the government, and it was Juan Velasco Alvarado, who was a military who wanted to implant a revolutionary government, new state. So he was under the influence of nationalizing all the companies, our land. The land was given to the peasant. He did a new agrarian reform, a law, and also in the education, new reform, which was given to a new form of taking our identities, rescuing our identities that mainly were giving the chance to the Andean people. So it was a content at the beginning, but unfortunately, so the land was taken from the previous owner and was given to the peasant, but it was not educating the peasant to control the lands. And that was with the time growth and a big economical crisis, the peasant didn't know how to manage the land. They didn't know about to control the economy. They didn't know about the policy of the market, anything. So there was a crisis, and for those time, it was an easy way for the left wing to work, because Velasco invited to some left wing leaders and movements. So the Communist Party, with the influence of the Soviet Union on that time, the Communist Party worked with this government of Velasco Alvarado. So they then, this government, because he didn't was pro-capitalist and no communist, so this government started to fail in the economy, and brought a new rising of protests, and things started to flourish and grow. But there was another party from the Maoist influence. They were not supporting this government, and they were fighting for the rights, and they were in the unions, doing a lot of work. And from that time is one of the branches of that Maoist party is when Chinese past years. And So they say that from the 60s they were working in a way of how to do the revolution through arms, but in the 80s appeared as a Chinese path, this party. So that was a big problem for the government from the 80s.
Right.
And after Velasco, Morales Bermúdez, another military, came to power in another coup. And then because there was McCarthyist persecution with all people in the left-wing members, he was part of the Plan Condor. United States were controlling and persecuting all the left-wing members in different countries in South America. So it was a lot of social conflicts and violence and repression. And then he convoced for a new constitutional assembly. So in that assembly, so the constitution was in 1979, and they were a majority of the, it was a social democratic have the majority. And then it was a lot of groups of the left wing. So it was a mixture, and that constitution was, we can say, it covered decently to the right of everybody. But what happened that then after some other president that came, it was in Fujimori was elected. He was unknown political, and he came. Normally in Peru, the president were white and elite people from the elite and businessman, or people from the upper class. But this Fujimori was not known, and also he became emerged suddenly from March 1990 to April in the election. He rise in the popularity, and he won the elections, and he passed to the second round with Mario Vargas Llosa, and he won. And Mario Vargas Llosa didn't forbid about that. He was humiliated by that Fujimori. And then Fujimori wanted to implement government according to his own appetites. And he was the man who implemented the neoliberalism grotesquely, because previously Alan Garcia Perez was trying to sign agreements, but it was Fujimori who implemented that. And as was Katerina saying, all the rights of working people was in disadvantage, and he started to suppress some agreements that favorable to our country. He opened the markets, free markets, the taxes, the law of taxes in regard of the new corporations from the foreign corporation were taken out. So all the neoliberalism intact was implemented by Fujimori. So then on that time, they called terrorism, but there were two main groups, which was Chinese Path and Tupac Amaru revolutionary movement. Was more the tendency of Guevariste, were on place doing a lot of activities. And Fujimori wanted to smash all in the most confrontational way. So he started to violate the human rights, and it was a very criminal method that he used. And he wanted to also change the constitution in a way that favorite with a favoritism to his government, but he couldn't because in the Congress he didn't have the majority. So what happened that his period of government was in 1990s, and on the 5th of April 1992, he declared his own coup, and he closed the Congress, and he convoked for a new constitution, and then again with a lot of violation of the human rights and a lot of corruption. So that was mainly the picture of Fujimori, the father, we could say now.
Yeah. Should we pick it up from there then? So we've got a lot of the history there that we can sort of cut into the episode. So that's a really good lay down of the history, and it's helped us a lot. So should we start now? Obviously, we'll start with some background to the recent election. So maybe from Fujimori onwards, we can talk about. But before that, I just wanted to ask, what do we think? Because obviously you explained a history of Peru that was incredibly uncertain throughout the 20th century. There was, even compared to the rest of Latin America at that time, Peru really struggled to establish even, something resembling a democracy. So maybe if we bring Katerina in, do you maybe have any reasons why it took Peru so long to establish that sort of resemblance of a democracy?
That's a difficult question to ask. Why did Peru take such a long time to establish a resemblance to democracy? You know what? I don't know. I'm going to pass that one over to Betty.
Because.
So, is there anything that distinguishes Peru from the rest of Latin America?
Fujimori implanted a type of nationalism government, and he was followed by the very low classes, the people who are in his government, because he was giving the help to the rich people, because in his government it was the gap between rich and poor, it was more wider. And then there was a lot of people who migrate from the Andes, to the coast, mainly to Lima, and the only way to survive was working as an informal market and new businessman, but not in the level of competition with the bigger ones. But these were people from the Andes, and they followed to Fujimori like a god. So he was a good liar, saying that he is for them and that he going to help them. And he used tricks. Actually, it's very, very difficult to understand how poor people was following him. And he talked about against, for example, the white people, and they see that he was like Chinese, and actually he was a Japanese descendant, but then people, they call it a little Chinese in a tender way. And he wear a poncho, the Andean poncho, and he always visited, and then he was giving money like his daughter does now. He was very like paternalistic with the people. So he also tend spider web in the different district villages, and in the shanty towns and everywhere. He was paying people to go to work with these poor people. So in programs, assistentialist programs, in order to keep quiet to the people. So he was playing the role of a messiah with all these poor people. And he always believed his flag of victory was that, oh, I smash, I end the terrorism. And because the terrorism, especially Shining Path, was being using cruel and very, very revenged with the poor people, the peasants. They were killing the poor people. They saw that they were spies or they were keeping people to the state. So Fujimori always say that I'm here for you and I'm battling terrorism. Shining Path is our enemy. So here is the enemy of terrorism and you and I am here for you. So mainly was a brainwashing that he was doing with people, the poorer people. So, and then until recently, before the appearance of Pedro Castillo, people were saying, no, I am Fujimori's. I support Fujimori because he ended terrorism. So that was the speech of these poor people. But they didn't know nothing about who was there. They didn't know, for example, not even what was his full name. They didn't know where he was born. So basic detail, they didn't know. They just say, oh, our little Chinese Fujimori, he saved us from terrorism. And that's the most important. Even that he was corrupted, we love him. Because he was very tender with people. That was the key. And because the majority of the population is poor. So that is one of the big key instruments that he used.
Okay, brilliant.
And about hope, the other thing that he managed is he did reforms in the educational system. For example, he took away from the universities very key program like historic materialism, dialectic materialism, he took out of the curriculum. And also he reduced the programs like social anthropology or social science because he saw that that was the focus of the terrorism. So he started to cut investment in those programs. And he made ignorant people. He took philosophy, sociology from the secondary school, for example. So he made people ignorant and put in the TV these reality shows, and people was very entertained with this program.
Can I go back to the question?
Yeah, sure.
That you asked, because I do wonder if one of the reasons why Peru during its history never really got a proper democratic government is because of the feudal nature of its economy. So in Peru, Betty talked about how the economy in Peru, even during the 20th century, did have a very strong feudal nature. She mentioned Hugo Blanco, who is a famous peasant leader. He's actually still alive. He's in his 80s now. And he recounts how during his childhood, he knew of peasants that were branded by landowners as if they were like, cattle. They were branded that you are my property, you work on my land, I own you. And that was the structure of the Peruvian economy. And different to Bolivia, Bolivia has a mining sector, and it has a form of mining that is very labor intensive. So in Bolivia, you had lots and lots of miners gathered together every single day in the mine at work, away from the mine owners. The mine owners wouldn't go down into the mine. And so that gave a chance for working class people to organize. Whereas in Peru, you do have mining, but it's not so labor intensive. You don't have these huge concentrations of workers that are gathering together every day to go to work. And you just have a sort of, so before the neoliberal period, Peru was 70% of the population was rural. And that was the structure of its economy. So I do wonder if that has something to do with the fact that a democratic government never emerged, and it was just a sort of series of military governments. And also, obviously, there is the influence of Plan Condor in the 20th century. The USA was always keeping its eye on that entire region in order to put down any kind of any prospect of a left alternative, because Peru is very resource rich.
Yeah, that's interesting. So the kind of wealthy landowning class really benefited from the nature of the Peruvian economy and Peru as a country. Just because I'm just trying to think where we should go from here, because we're kind of a bit back and forth. If we talk now a little bit about, so obviously we covered Fujimori. If we talk about after Fujimori, so the sort of 21st century onwards, was there some level of democracy established after Fujimori? Obviously that didn't go too well, because things in Peru are far from perfect now, and that's, you know, why Castillo is maybe finding success now. But what was that period like for Peru's working class in particular? What kind of democracy was established, and why was it perhaps not enough?
Sorry, I think as well, just to sort of add to that question, it's the sort of the question of how do these particularly the last decade, influence the fact that you've got the daughter of a former dictator running against a left-wing populist, and they are the two options at the ballot box. Sort of how is there been a perceived stability over the last decade that was actually built on sort of unsteady foundations that have led to this sort of point that we're at now in Peru with the two candidates?
What happened with Fujimori is that, you know, as Betty mentioned, you've got this very authoritarian government that introduces these shock neoliberal measures, that dissolves Congress, carries out a self-coup, and carries out a very brutal counterinsurgency strategy against not just Shining Path, but anyone left wing could be a target. Any activist students. There was massacres. There was he's in jail now for crimes against humanity, and it all came to a head in 2000 when he was on a trip abroad in Bahrain doing presidential stuff there, and I don't know what happened. That's one to ask Betty, but for some reason he was like, it's getting too hot, I need to get out, and he resigned by fax. And then he fled to Japan, and from there there was the efforts to extradite him. And after that, you had a series of governments that I suppose were still neoliberal, still quite conservative or centrist, but there was an effort, to be fair, to heal those wounds of Fujimoriism. And so you have to admire Peru as a country and as a society, because they're one of the few societies that have actually managed to jail their own former dictator without going to the International Criminal Court. They did it themselves in their own courts. After he resigned, there was a president called Alejandro Toledo, who opened the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which was a real reckoning for Peruvian society. This was the moment when Peruvians were forced to see what happened during the internal conflict, because so many Peruvians in the city, especially in Lima, did not know the extent of the civil war. They thought it was just a couple of car bombs that happened in Lima. They didn't know that thousands and thousands of people had been slaughtered in the Andes. And what the Truth and Reconciliation Commission did was literally count the dead. They literally went out to Ayacucho and to these other places in the Andes and asked people, do you have relatives that died? They looked at hospital records, police records. They got together all the data. And whereas originally, I think a lot of Lima society thought that it was maybe 9,000 people that had died during this conflict, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission came out and said, we've counted, and it was 69,000 people. And it was a shock. And the majority of the people that were killed in that conflict were Quechua speakers. I think more than half were Quechua speakers, or spoke Quechua as a first language. There has been some research afterwards to suggest that maybe they overcounted, that maybe the real figure was 48,000, but that's still a lot more than what people thought it was. And the interesting thing about the war is that, unlike other civil wars, if you look at Colombia, I was looking at the statistics, some of the reports from Colombia say that the FARC is responsible for maybe 16% of the killings, and the rest is the state, and paramilitaries is the biggest group responsible. So in most conflicts around, it's non-state actors that commit the minority of killings, and it's the state that commits the majority, whereas in Peru it was different, which is why the Shining Path is sort of, people are so terrified of them, because of the extent to which they were very brutal in carrying out those killings. They basically, their tactic, as it was explained to me by a professor of genocide that came to my university, was that the Shining Path looked at regimes, right-wing regimes around Latin America, in say Argentina, in Chile, and they said, oh, they got to power by killing people. So that's how we can get to power. We can use the same tactics that the right wing uses, of massacres, of terror, of striking fear into populations to get to power, right? And I think that's stupid, because what that neglects is the fact that these right wing regimes, they had imperialism on their side. They had Operation Condor on their side. They had the US State Department, the CIA on their side, and the left is never going to have that. So the left cannot seize power through just killing loads of people. And also the Shining Path were very much anti-political engagement. They didn't want to engage in any political system whatsoever, so they would kill left-wing candidates from a left-wing party. For example, in the 80s, there was a left-wing party called Izquierda Unida. They would kill them. They would kill trade unionists. But I think, obviously, within Peruvian society, people focus, I think, too much on the killings of the Shining Path, and they neglect the fact that the state also committed a lot of killings. And again, this other report that revised the figures that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission came out with. So the Truth and Reconciliation Commission comes out with a report that says 69,000 people were killed, half of those by the Shining Path. and half of those by other actors, the state, the army, the police, the rondas campesinas, other groups. Whereas I've seen another study that came out with a figure, actually it was 48,000 people were killed, and it was a lot more by the state. I think it was something like 60% by the state and 40% by the Shining Path, which is still quite a lot compared to, as I said, other insurgent movements. As I said, the FARC is only responsible for 16% of killings in Colombia. But the state's role in those killings was they committed massacres, of course. They would stigmatize certain communities as being communist or as being Shining Path, and those communities would be targeted for killings. There was massacres, there was people that would organize, students that would organize would be targeted for massacres, and that was the state's role. And that was particularly brutal during Fujimori's reign. And so after Fujimori resigned by fax, there was an attempt by Peruvian society to actually look at what had happened, uncover the truth, to go through a very, very painful and horrific process where people that had never even realized what was going on in Ayacucho, in the countryside, were forced to look at these farming communities, these peasants, campesinos, and listen to their stories of suffering. Now, I think that did help sort of transition into a more sort of bourgeois democratic structure. But I don't think that Peru is, even now, still a proper functioning democracy. So, as I said, it's a bourgeois democracy, but it's kind of, there's a high level of disempowerment. There's a high level of centralization. Everything is Lima. It's a democracy if you live in Lima and if you are from Lima. But I don't think it's a democracy if you're from the provinces, if you're from the Andes or the Amazon. It's a highly centralized system. And frankly, every single election since Fujimori left has been won by Lima, by that 1/3 of people that live in Lima. And to a certain extent, there's parts of the northern coast that also votes along the same lines as Lima does, which is, these are conservative, neoliberal aligned societies. And so the past few elections, people in Cusco, in Arequipa, Huancavelica, all these places have been going to the polls and voting, and their candidate never, ever gains any kind of traction or never wins. And you have these shocking figures of, say, for example, this time round, Pedro Castillo got above 80% in Cusco and in Ayacucho. There were, I think, 16 regions of Peru, of the Amazon and the Andes, where Pedro Castillo got more than 63%, right? Including up to 83%. So Cusco, I think it was 83%, right? City and countryside of Cusco together voted 83% for Pedro Castillo. And yet he still only scrapes by like 50.2%. And this process has been repeated in previous elections, but without resulting in any victory for Peruvians living outside of Lima. I suppose, demonstrates that there is a task, I think, to really reform society to make it less centralized and more democratic and more devolved. So yeah, I don't know what Betty's opinion on this is as well.
Yeah, I'd like to go a little bit behind in order to show how this Keiko phenomenon appears. Keiko is the child of Fujimori, and the younger sister, and she looks like she suffered of attention seeking, and she was left alone while her father was busy, and the mother also started to do some social work, like charity work as a first dame of the first lady. And but you have to understand that the Fujimori family is like a dynasty, and they were brought up like that. They were close, they surrounded, their friend, their family, all are Japanese. So it was looked that the father wanted to, his younger son, Kenji, who is also part of the politics, wanted to be the successor, but this young guy was a very stupid man, always was interested in stupid things, and very son of daddy, and he was not interested, he was not serious. So the one that who could be was Keiko. And Keiko learned all the tricks, all the corruption, everything she learned from his dad. And they were living in the, in sometimes when Fujimori was threatened and he was worried about his family, he transferred the family to a Pentagonito, like the Pentagon. It was in Peru, a place where they call Little Pentagon, where the torture and everything was done there. It was a big place, the most trusted, and where his first man, who was the second after Fujimori, was Vladimiro Montesinos, a very corrupted and criminal man, was in charge of all the security of Peru. So they were there. And they were listening and hearing everything, the torture and everything. So they lived in that environment. So Keiko, even though when the wife of Alberto Fujimori was tortured because she denounced that it was corruption with the clothes that from Japan came to give to the children, poor children, the Fujimori family, the sister and brother-in-law of Fujimori were commercializing and doing their own business. And then the rough and the lower clothes they put to the charity to give the children. So the wife denounced that because they were using her name as a first lady. So she was tortured by Alberto Fujimori, and she was disappeared. So we didn't know where was she, and she was kidnapped by the military under the order of Fujimori. So Keiko didn't care about what was happening with her mother, and his father said, "You are going to be the first lady now." So she ignored the suffering of her mother, the denounce that she did, and she was very happy and very thrilled, saw the power of being the first lady. So that was the beginning of taste the power for her. And she always denied, for example, her father did a program of sterilization. It was doing operations to thousands of women from the Andes, peasants, cut the ovaries, the uterus. They had operation without their consent. They were lying to do other business, but Fujimori didn't want people from the Andes to grow. So they were doing this kind of criminal operation. And then she always in their campaign was saying, why you didn't say nothing about your daughter, your mother, why you didn't say anything about women, you don't defend women because you condone that criminal act of your father. And she recently, in her campaign, she said, that was no sterilization, that was a planning program. So she denied all of that. And yeah, so she started to taste, as I said, the power when she was beside her dad. She knew everything. And even though she knows that, for example, she decided to go to study, the 4 children have studied in the United States. And this Vladimiro Montesino, who is the right hand of Fujimori, from money from the state, he was paying the university, he was paying the luxury of the children, and even the most close men from Fujimori. So Keiko knew everything about that, you know. And Fujimori is actually stole from our fiscal, the Peruvian fiscal, he still have kept $6,000 million. It's lost. And we are waiting that he can return. So we say that maybe Keiko also is using that, but she's actually she's asked for 30 years of prison because he have a long case in regard of corruption and money that came illicit money from Odebrecht company to support her campaign. And she denies and denies and denies. So that is the beginning of Keiko Fujimori, how she started to come. You know?
So, I mean, on that then, really, it's sort of with the current election, which we'll obviously build on and talk through, is that you can see that those sort of like where the battle lines are already between those voters that are this sort of like red scare tactic is going to work for when you talk about sort of violence on the shining path. Then there's those groups that have been, as you say, you know, state sterilization against them and state violence. You know, they're in that another camp. You have the rural versus the urban. They're the sort of that's all come to ahead in this election. You can see who votes for who, but that's sort of a 20-year, 30-year process, whatever.
It's the same, but Keiko always used the language and the speech of his father. She said, "Oh, I am with you, women, poor women from the Andes." But then they said, "What? Well, do you remember what your father did?" And
sterilized thousands of women.
To take off from gave him his father, her father. So also she said the communism, and she talked about against communism. So she divided the country between who are the liberty and democracy and the communism. And she terrorized to everybody like his father did. So everybody from the left wing, or even though they were against the Fujimori, they say, "Oh, they are terrorists." And they did an adjective, a word that they said to terruco. Terruco is from terrorist, and also Juco, like the Andes award, they yawned and say terruco. Oh, you are a terruco, you are a terruca. And there is persecution because Fujimori was in charge of during the last government, this period where the majority of Fujimoris were there, they changed the law to name terrorism everybody who is doing apology to the against the establishment. So they are terrorists, suspect of terrorism. Yeah, so
it wasn't.
We've all been accused of being terrorists. Like I've been accused of being a terrorist. Betty, anyone on the left in Peru is a terrorist, according to the right wing. So like a couple of years ago, I expressed support on Facebook for the teacher strike. All of a sudden, I'm a terrorist. I've got friends in Peru writing to me saying you're a terrorist. That's what it's like in Peru. That's the level of discourse in Peru against the left. There are many people in Peru that would say that every single one of us together in this meeting now is a terrorist just because of our left-wing views. That's what it's like. And that's the phenomenon of terruquear. It's even a verb, to brand someone a terrorist, terruquear. There was jokes going around in Peru during these elections that there are people that see terrorists everywhere. They even see terrorists in their ceviche.
But you know, it's funny because Fujimori used the terrorism to convince people that he's the best president. But he was, for example, doing narco traffic, and also he was allowing to sell arms to the FARC in Colombia. You know, he was in that traffic of arms, and also in his flight, they was carrying 1,000 of kilos of cocaine. His son, because they have property, we don't know where, from what money. His son Kenji had a store warehouses, and they found hundreds of kilos of cocaine. So he said, I don't know. So they are involved with cocaine, with traffic, narco traffic. That way we call narco terrorist government. So they are so indeed with the crime stuff, but they deny because they know how to do this, cover everything. And I think it's a good moment to talk about Pedro Castillo, how he emerged in the middle of this corruption, because after Alberto Fujimori, it came the government, as Katerina said, of Alejandro Toledo, who was very Andes complexion, but he was corrupted because since Fujimori, he left the inheritance of the corruption. So to be politics in Peru is actually an investment. We have to buy a place to be in the list of the parties, and we sell our house to put the money to enter in that list in the competition, because after that, the corruption gives us back all the money. So how the government function after Toledo became the majority of Keiko Fujimori party, and she was buying people with money and money and money, like his dad did. So, and actually she wanted to continue the Fujimoriism, and in that panorama is where it comes suddenly Pedro Castillo.
So
I
guess,
say,
I mean,
oh, sorry, Morgan. I was just going to say, in terms of Castillo, like talking about the terrorism, how important that that is in the psyche to talk about left wing and terrorism. How obviously sort of Castillo's background in trade unionism and things like that. How does the left get over that in Peru generally, not just Castillo himself? We'll go into it in more detail, but how has the left in Peru been able to cut through to people whilst, like you say, there's literally, there's it's so much in the psyche that anybody associates anything of left of center is terrorist,
especially with a media that is so right wing as well, and so in defense of the establishment. How did Castillo kind of get over that accusation, that false accusation? How did he combat?
I think the reason why Pedro Castillo was able to cut through is because he's not a politician. And this could potentially be a weakness for him because he's got no experience. He just rose to prominence in 2017 as a union leader, leading the teacher strike. But he had never run for office before at all. He's not even a member of the party on whose ticket he ran for. He's not even a member of Peru Libre. Rather, the Peru Libre party invited him to be their presidential candidate. And I think he managed to cut through precisely because there is such distrust in Peru of politicians. There's huge, massive distrust because there's been so many corruption scandals over the past few years. There's been such instability. Peru's had 5 presidents in the last 5 years. Kuczynski had to leave because he was corrupt, and because they found out that Kenji Fujimori had helped bribe people in order to vote against Kuczynski's impeachment, and then another guy comes in and tries to tackle corruption, and he's impeached because he tried to tackle corruption. How dare he tackle corruption? And so all the
in 1 week he was 3 presidents.
yeah. And so I mean, basically, what it is that Pedro Castillo is not a politician. And that's what cut through, because people had got used to the idea that all politicians are corrupt. And he's not from the traditional, he's not from a left-wing party that has any kind of popularity in recent years. We thought in the past few years that the main left-wing force was Veronica Mendoza's party. So this woman, Veronica Mendoza, she's I like her because she seems like me. She's a young woman, millennial from Cusco, which is my old stomping ground. She's mixed. She has a mixed identity, half French, half Cusqueña. She speaks Quechua, but and she was the real hope during the last elections. But because she comes from the left, she was tarnished so much as a terrorist. She's a terrorist, blah, blah, blah. And also they really weaponized Venezuela against her and used Venezuela as a stick to beat her with, you know, you're going to turn us into Venezuela, blah, blah, blah. And she acquiesced, it has to be said, to all of that harsh criticism and slander, and she started to moderate her discourse. Not only moderate her discourse, but say things really quite appalling, like say she said that, oh, she believes that Venezuela is a dictatorship, and basically what I'm saying is that she tried so hard to become electable that she became unelectable. That's what happened to the sort of the left-wing force that people thought was going to be a competitor in these elections. And in the end, her party got, I think, 6%, or yeah, it was 6% of the vote share in the first round. People started, you know, because people started to say, you're the izquierda caviar, you're the caviar left. That's an expression that I learned from Betty. You're the caviar left. You don't represent the people. And then along comes this teacher from the countryside, and you have this potential for the first time for someone from a rural community to actually be in the race. And he ascended really, really quickly. So his arrival in the second round was such a surprise, and he won the first round as well. His winning of the first round was such a surprise that even CNN didn't have a photo for him, because no one had ever heard of him before. But that was his strength. The fact that no one had ever heard of him before, and the fact that he came out of nowhere, the fact that he was just literally a teacher that had to take time off of work from teaching little kids in the countryside, that was his strength. And that's why he cut through.
I suppose the media wouldn't have had quite as much time to, you know, berate him and destroy his character for years, and try to influence him. So I suppose that is a big advantage for him to be this surprise candidate. What are your hopes? Because there seems to be a bit of a trend with the left being sort of forced to cave in and sort of cede ground a little bit because of how aggressive the attack, and it's understandable about how aggressive the attacks from the right wing are. Like, you're a terrorist, you're this and the other. What are your hopes for Castillo? Obviously now it looks like he's won. What are your hopes for him being able to avoid that kind of caving to pressure? Do you know what I mean?
Before to answer your question, I want to point out something very important. Peru is a very racist country, very racist. And there is division between the white people and the Andes people from rural zones, and racism with the white people, which is very, it's a small group in comparison of the whole country. So they made treat like with superiority to the inferiors, you know. And when the migration happened, people from Andes come to Lima, and they are in the outside of the exclusive area of Lima. So they take some years to the acculturation, to adapt to the new culture. And then when they were still coming, these came, the migrants from the first generation started to treat badly to the new ones. So in that panorama, Veronica Mendoza, who was from the left, actually, in my opinion, part of the Fujimoriist and the right wing picked her as a terrorist, which is not. She's democratic, like the social democratic, like international social democratic. So she even said, "I'm not right. I'm not left. I am from the people." And I always criticize that, because the way you are from the people, that people covers the bourgeoisie. So she was not convinced for some part of the left, but the majority of the left, especially the old chaps, all izquierdistas, or all left wing and the dinosaurs characters, it was like that. Oh, I couldn't do the revolution. This is my last hope. So they all support and the new generation as well. But Veronica Castillo, in my opinion, and the most other opinion, is that she didn't endear the language of the peasants, even that she came from a rural area. But she was politically formed and learned politics in Paris. Yeah, she was friend of Ollantumala's wife, and they met them as a couple. So she was like a middle class left wing. So she didn't come from the real deep war and the suffering of the working class, of the peasants. So she was very careful, talking not to go against the rights and against the corporation, against inversionists. She was not also too far to the left. She always criticized Venezuela, and she was against Maduro. So she was in the middle. So even the left wing believed that she was the last hope. But that's because she didn't dare the heart of the working class and the rural people. So people didn't believe in, and also distrust to this left, we could say reformist way, because it was not anti-neoliberalist. Never she used, she's going to be against the neoliberalism. She said, we are going to do a restructuration of the state. So then suddenly comes Pedro Castillo from the Peru Profundo. We use this phrase to say deep Peru. Well, how do you translate Peru Profundo, Katerina?
Deep Peru.
Deep Peru, yeah. So he came, a peasant, a rondero, teacher from the very rural areas, and he worked as a peasant. He knows, he used the yankees, he uses the poncho, the hat, and he knows perfectly what happened, what is the situation and the problem of the agriculture sector, from how is the situation of the poor children from a poor school. He knows that. He knows what is the situation of women and everything. So he came with his own language, of his own life, of the life of his neighbor, the life of the rural areas. So he was more convinced to people that they are not interested in political parties, that he believed that he was the Messiah, that they were needed for a long time, from 200 years since the first independence in Peru. So that was how he came suddenly, and he started to say in his speech, he said, no poor people in a rich country. No, this is the word of a maestro, a teacher. So he was more convinced, he was natural speaking the speeches. You know? And there was some initial problems about Pedro Castillo because he's conservative, he's a believer. He was against the euthanasia, he was against the equality marriage of the same sex, he was against the marijuana consume, issues like that. But that cost him a lot of criticism. So he started to say that in the constitutional assembly, they have to work that. And he started to stop of talking that. I said, I think he learned because he's new. He doesn't have any experience. He even didn't know how to speak because he was natural. He didn't prepare his speeches. He learned them, but then say.
I was going to say on that, Betty, that's been an interesting point that I've read up on Castillo's program, that it seems one of the criticisms from maybe the left has been that there's been a purposeful sort of ignoring of social issues, and sort of certain social issues have been put to the side with economic issues at the forefront. So do you think that that's something that it's been that those social issues is now developing as he becomes sort of, you know, he's won the election, or is there a concern at all in the Peruvian left that maybe some social issues have been left to the side?
So it's a difficult one because so as Betty mentioned, the issue of racism is always in the background in Peruvian politics, and you have really never had someone from a place like Cajamarca, from the Andes, be elected to be president. That's never happened. And Betty, as she said, she wrote an article about the racism that Pedro Castillo suffered, even from sections of the left who said, no, we can't have this person be our prime candidate. It should be someone more respectable for the middle class, you know, less indigenous,
intellectual.
So there's that. But then, so even the fact that he has won is a anti-racist win. However, the problem is he himself personally has quite socially conservative views. His wife is an evangelical, and I have to say, evangelicalism is a real. I don't want to use the word cancer because that's a word that the right wing always uses, you know, but it's a real, it's a virus within Peruvian politics and within Latin American politics. It's horrific. It's almost as bad as the coronavirus. Every single week I find a new friend has fallen to it, has succumbed to it, and they're all of a sudden they're now saying, oh, I've converted to evangelicalism and now I'm going on a march against gender theory. And I don't, obviously it's fine for someone to have their own personal religion, you know, we all have our own personal beliefs, but it's the way that evangelicalism is so politicized, and it's not just you just go and have your own personal beliefs and go to church every Sunday. It's you take this into politics and you go march against feminism and against the gays, and that is a worrying aspect, that he has that connection to evangelicalism and to social conservatism. However, the electoral alliance that he went into after he won the first round was with Veronica Mendoza's party, and she's an interesting character because, as I said, she really moderated and tried to make more centrist her political discourse over the last few years. But one thing that she hasn't really backed down on is the issue of being pro-choice and abortion rights, and so I hope that this alliance that he went into in order to secure his second round victory, and also he's going to need the votes from like other smaller left-wing parties in Congress. I hope this alliance will mean that he drops that social conservatism, and not just the political alliance, but I hope that the social movements will push him in that direction, because there is, for example, strong feminist movement in Peru that are marching against femicides, against the shocking rates of murder of women, and he says that he's against. He said before that he was against a gender focus in education, gender education, but obviously these social movements are saying no, we have to educate our children about gender violence because that's the way that we prevent it. So I'm hoping, we have to see what's going to happen, but I'm hoping that he will incorporate the ideas of those social movements and the other smaller left-wing parties. And he had said that it's up to the Peruvian people ultimately. And really, as I said, he's a political novice, so we're going to have to see what happens once he gets into power. And it's a time, I think, to keep mobilizing for the left in order to keep him on the right path and in order to back him up.
Yeah, well, like you said before, him being a political novice is in some ways an advantage, or in a lot of ways an advantage. And hopefully being from the people, he'll be willing to listen to the people as well when it comes to his presidency. And like Betty said, he even stopped saying some of the things that were upsetting certain social movements as well. So maybe he'll allow people to influence him even further in his government. Just to wrap it up, just because I'm concerned about time, just to talk about, I mean, obviously it looks like the victory is sealed now. There are some claims from Fujimori and her camp about electoral fraud and things, but it looks as if those claims aren't going anywhere. Fingers crossed. So what are the hopes now that it looks like he has won? What would you like Castillo to do? What would be the main sort of policies that you would like him to put in place?
For us as a people, and as left wing people, and the country and the whole majority, we see in Pedro Castillo as the new hope, and the exact person, the exact leader that we need for these 200 centuries of since the first independence. Yeah, so we needed a person, a simple person, not a corrupted person, a new character to come to do to rule our country, a clean person. And he left, definitely he left. But he has. We hope that at least he be more open and be inclusive with everybody. And listen more to the base, because he's been new. He didn't have the experience of go to travel to other things. He only traveled in 2017 from Lima, from Catamarca to Lima with the teachers. So now he has to travel to send the message and collect the needs of people. So now he has to be more open, and they hope that he would do at the end and finish with the corruption. Well, not finish, but take the Fujimoris out. Because when she was in jail, in preliminary jail, her party was very hurt, very hurt. So now we hope that Pedro Castillo implements no corruption country, clean all the states, and also give more opportunity to the poorer, yeah, and be more inclusive. So Katerina, what do you think?
So my hopes for this new administration is, first of all, I hope this will be the death of Fujimoriism. Fujimoriism needs to die. It is a criminal enterprise, and that's not my words. That's not hyperbole. That's not left-wing radicals that are saying this. That's actual prosecutors that are investigating Keiko Fujimori and her political party. They're now saying, the more we investigate, the more we realize this whole enterprise is a criminal enterprise, and she is she's on bail. I don't know how she was allowed to run as a candidate, but she was released from bail from pre-trial detention and allowed to run as a candidate, but she's being tried for corruption, for running a criminal enterprise, for money laundering, for perverting the course of justice. And what I hope is that from now on, that due process will be allowed to continue, that those brave prosecutors that have been taking on this this group of far-right, heavily corrupt, linked to drug traffickers, linked to Odebrecht, linked to dirty money. This group will finally be taken down, and I hope that those brave prosecutors that are doing that work will be allowed to do that work without persecution and without suffering any bad consequences for taking on this this huge interest that only a couple of years ago controlled the Congress. And so I hope that Keiko Fujimori ends up in jail. The prosecutors are asking for a 30-year sentence. I hope she gets some of that. And this is why she had to run, by the way, because if she didn't, because
she gets immunity.
Yeah, because she needed the immunity.
Ah, well, she's so obsessive with
Yeah.
And hasn't she lost 3 now as well?
Sorry?
Has she lost more than one election now as well? Hasn't she run before?
Yeah, this is the third time.
3 times.
Yeah.
She's trying to get away with it then.
The charges go back to, I think, the first time she ran as a candidate. The first time she ran as a candidate, she's been accused of campaign finance crimes. So I hope she gets prosecuted. I hope for a new constitution. Pedro Castillo has promised a new constitution, and that proposal is very popular in Peru. As we said before, Peru is currently living under the Fujimori constitution of 1993. So similar to Chile, it has a constitution that was forged in dictatorship. And we hope for a constituent process similar to what happened in Bolivia, similar to what happened in Venezuela. I know Venezuela is a country that's very stigmatized, and everyone's like, we don't want to be like Venezuela. Fine, but you can write your own constitution devised by the people democratically through a constituent assembly, and I have high hopes for that. And the task for Pedro Castillo and for his allies is enormous, because really they're having to undo 500 years of colonialism, of plunder, of feudalism, of capitalism, of oppression, of campesino, indigenous populations. and it's a huge task. And we need to stay mobilized. We need to not just back him up, but push him in the right direction in order for him to be able to undertake this huge task ahead.
Just on that quickly as well. I mean, in terms of, I mean, last time we had you on, Katerina, you said that if we could crack Peru as the left, that is, we said it in the last podcast. We said, you know, it'd be good to have you on again because, you know, you said if we could crack Peru as the left, then, you know, the rest will fall. How important is this in terms of the wider narrative of Latin America? This potential, I don't know if it's being called sort of the second pink tide, where you consider the, obviously the win in Bolivia. I mean, Venezuela, it's you know, all its difficulties, but struggling along. Lula is ahead in the polls in Brazil, and there's other sort of successes in the region. How important is this win in terms of that, and how important for the left in Peru is the fact that they have other bases of support in the area, sort of against that traditional Western and American axis that will sort of do all they can to try and bring those regimes down or those governments down?
Yeah, Katerina, you are so well to answer that.
Okay. I'll say something and then you say something, Betty. It's massive. I mean, when I said that though, when I listened back to it, I could hear my Colombian friends screaming at me because obviously the most stubborn area is not just Peru but Colombia. So there's that, but then there is rising social movements in Colombia, huge mobilizations going on in Colombia. I spoke to a Colombian comrade the other day, and I said, but you've had protests before. Is this going to result in anything, in any kind of taking of power? And he said, no, because we've had protests before, and these mobilizations are not organized. Having said that, in Peru, the mobilizations that we've had over the past few years, especially the 2020 mobilizations, they weren't organized. There was no organized party or organized social movement. There was no united force behind it. It was spontaneous. And they managed to, the left managed to win in Peru. So this victory is massive, but I think that we should not think it's over already, because as I said, the left did win in Peru in 2010, but then that government very quickly moved to the right. However, some people have pointed out that the difference is that the candidate that won was sort of, he was mixed race. He did have some indigenous blood and he had an indigenous name, Ollantaytamala. But he did come from Lima, and he did come from quite a middle class background. Sorry, this is the first time that we have a candidate that comes from the countryside, from a peasant background. So it's in a country where there's been so much racism and so much desprecio, so much racism towards the Andes and towards the countryside. This is huge. So yeah, I hope that this means that Chile will follow, Brazil will follow, and also I hope that Pedro Castillo will be able to hold firm on the ticket that he ran on.
Yeah, I want to contribute to that. First of all, pointed out about Ollantaytamala, who was left, who won, which was true, but he was a traitor. So as soon as he became in power, because one of the points key of his campaign was against the mineras, mining companies, and he said, we want water because they want to empty our lagoons, they wanted to empty to do to take the gold inside underneath the land. So Ollantumala said, we want water, no gold. But then when he was on power, he started to deal with the mining corporation. And then he said, we could survive with water and gold. So that was Ollantumala, all the left him alone. So then going to the answer, so I wanted to point out that Peru has been a key country in the Lima Group. The Lima Group was formed in conjunction with the United States, and Luis Almagro was one of the patronizers of that group, was formed for most of the right-wing countries in Latin America to fight against the Venezuela regime. So they were taking power and how to support the United States in the war against Maduro. But the problem started when Argentina, Macri lost the elections, and I think Argentina said we are not interested in the Lima Group. And also Bolivia again said no to Lima Group, and Sáñez was trying to filter, negotiate with the group. And now in a job we said, well, the Lima Group is now without Lima because Pedro Castillo is definitely going to say no Lima Group. So in that point, it's going to be a very good success for the region in terms of the unite of the left countries.
Brilliant. That it's a very exciting time, exciting prospect. I think we'll wrap it up there just because we're concerned for time. Thanks very much, both of you, for coming on. It was really, really good to have you on. Very insightful, as always. I learned a lot. Yeah, so thanks a lot for taking time to come on, guys.
Yeah, thanks to you for inviting me, and Katerina as well, that she invited me.
Thanks for having us.